did you write them with both of these groups in mind, the left and the right, here in the United States and during such polarizing times?
Yeah, I would say it was somewhat challenging at first because ultimately, as a history background and an economic background, the goal in each of those is to be as unbiased as possible, to give only truth. Okay, because we've heard the saying that history is written by the victor, and it's true, but don't we want truth somewhere? Don't we want to have it down to where both sides have to agree to something? And so what I ultimately did was, even if I knew it, so my I wrote my senior thesis when I graduated college on Napoleon. So we one of the books is talks about Lewis and Clark. So I actually had to study quite a bit about that and learn about these things years, almost a decade ago now. And so because of all of that, I looked at it and said to myself, I am going to find as many primary sources as I can. Somebody who's actually there. I might use a secondary source, and maybe I'm using a secondary source because the primary source is it's good. Don't get me wrong; it's a primary source, but the secondary source I'm going to use more information from it, and citing one source or two sources is great, but I wasn't going to cite 12 sources, to find every one of these facts down. So I made sure that every single book had a citation. Okay, that was my first thing. Is it is not going to be my opinion. Okay, even if the things are my opinion, I have to have them backed up by a primary source. So it really isn't my opinion, and I'm basing what I think off of fact. Okay, or at least what we can say is fact.
Mm-hmm.
Number two, just being unbiased uh, wasn't really hard when you're looking about people from 17, 18, even 1900, right? When we look at the best president ever, there's going to be people who are going to say it is somebody in the last 3 or 4 presidents because that was somebody they were alive with. But when we say we're going to exclude them, then the majority of people who were not alive during, say, Reagan and before can look at it and say, this is why that person was good without being super biased. They didn't vote for the guy. They don't have any connection. They don't know these things. They weren't even alive when he was there. So we're going to be a lot more unbiased than somebody who was. Not that the person who was alive then can't say, actually, I met the guy and this is why I don't like him. So there's going to be that. I also tried to look at both sides of the political aisle on these things so that I could try to get as close to the center as possible. Okay. And there are people on both sides of the political aisle, if we're talking a two-party system, the United States is, that will say, I don't like this and this is why I don't like it. And the other person says it the exact opposite. And there's no way to appease everybody, but giving truth, even if they don't like it, it is as true and unbiased as we can possibly make it. And that's part of the reason doing the citizenship test is they're going to try to get questions that are as true and as unbiased as possible. And some of these questions have been around for decades. So it's not like they were just made yesterday. They're made before, some of these questions were around before I was even born.
Such as, like what?
Well, I can imagine that the very first president of the United States, that's one, right?
What do you mean?
Well, the question of who is the very first president of the United States, that's been something that in history we have looked at and said it is a pivotal point in time. Not only did he lead the United States through, the book 1776, right? That's one about Washington where it kind of gives dirt on Washington. Not that he was a bad guy, but he wasn't as successful as we're taught in school. And so, reading that and looking at who Washington was, we still want kids to know who Washington was. He was the first president. He didn't really want to be president, which is what we want the president to be. Somebody who is doing it because they know that they're the best fit, but don't want to have the power. That's what the United States is founded on. Voting for the president.
Cool. So you felt like through writing these books, you were able to take as centrist of a position as possible and write something that if you were to talk with 99 or 95% of teachers, they would agree with the contents of these books. Would you say that that's pretty accurate?
Yeah, it's pretty hard to argue against the United States citizenship test as something that we should write books about, which is nice because I didn't have to come up with a list first. But second, when I looked at it, I thought that was probably the most unbiased list we could come up with.